Welcome to the first turn. I'm your host, Hyena, and today, Llama and I are talking about This Week in Warhammer. If you like what you hear, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share, or let us know if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about. Alright, let's get to it.
Hey, welcome to the first turn. I'm Hyena.
I'm Llama.
Hi.
Welcome to the first
Welcome.
turn. After dark. That was creepy. I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah.
But yes, welcome anyway. If you're joining us for the first time, we are a talk show that mostly focuses on Warhammer, but painting and hobbying. And
If it's not your first time joining us, well,
Sorry,
thank
what are you
you.
doing
Or
back?
you know we're not going to say anything
nice
new.
to see you again. But we've got kind of hammering home some familiar topics. Adepticon's coming up. I actually just locked in our Gen Con badges. Really excited about the whole of the tournament and convention circuit in general, though. Just because we've kind of hinted and talked about how they've adjusted a bit of the timing,
The schedule.
of the bigger convention / tournaments, and we have a new one slotted in here at the end of summer. What is it? In October. Nova.
No.
Nova is the end
September.
of the end of summer.
Yeah.
And then after Nova, we now have
LVO again.
which is wild. LVO moved up 3 months. Crazy, right? That's
Used to always be in January. And they decided when they were rescheduling how Worlds was going to be the end of the ITC season. LVO decided, well, instead of starting the season, they still wanted to be an end cap. Mm-hmm. So they moved to October. So we technically get a second one this year,
right?
Which is interesting. And then that makes me wonder, though, like short of Adepticon in March, January, February will maybe then be a little
kind of a slower. Yeah.
Slow down.
Which, I mean, that's okay. Maybe no one wants to really travel in the middle of winter anyway.
Yeah, and like you maybe have spent a bunch during the holidays and you need a little bit to recover. And so
the holidays, that's another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's slower. But now you get that end of summer, early fall. It's going to be a jam-packed session. You've got Nova in September, now LVO October, Worlds November.
And while it might be difficult to go to all of them, I think it opens up doors for people to go to at least one of them.
Right.
That's the key. Is it's like, well, I can't make Nova, but LVO is a month away.
Mm-hmm.
I can make that one.
Right.
And that feels nice, you know.
And we mentioned this last week. They plan to sort of readjust the points as far as how they're allocated for certain event types. And so even if you can't make all three of those big events, and now I think that might also explain why they cut from 3 U.S. Opens to 2, is it could be because one of them, I think, was around that time of year. And so now they got rid of that, let LVO be there. So their 2 events are now like May and July or something like that. And so if you can't make those major events, now the mid-size events, your Bug Eater, Iowog, Midmo, those type of things, Bay Area, those are going to be worth more points. So if you can't make all of those major events, you can do that, earn some points, make one of the big events, and maybe earn your spot to Worlds or something, which is...
I like it as a system. I really do.
And I know Adepticon is now ITC, so we've got people going there, and that's pretty exciting.
Love it. But yeah, we've got Adepticon, speaking of, coming up very soon.
Less than 2 weeks.
Less than 2 weeks. Well, a week and a half from now.
Yeah.
Oof, I am not ready.
What?
I'm not ready. Well, so I've had to do some homework.
When is someone ever ready? I mean, they're always excited, but when are they ready?
So there's... I will do 2 serious things and a joke.
Okay. Serious thing number 1.
So serious thing number 1, painted army, right? I don't want to take an unpainted army just because it looks bad. Like a full painted army, even if it's not painted to the top standard, still looks better.
Always looks better. It does, yeah.
And I want to get that done. Number 2, I have to write. I have to do homework basically. I have to write a story.
I thought that in
justifying my choices for army for my events, because it's supposed to be narrative campaigns that I'm participating in, and you can't just show up with a net list. You have to come up with like a background and a story and everything. And so I've gone a bit above. I've written a story about it. I've named all my characters, all the models, not each individual one, but like units and stuff, that's a requirement. But I also went and like I even generated a custom character using the Anvil of Apotheosis because it's an AoS campaign. I had enough points over top of one of my heroes to upgrade him to for 20 more points a custom hero, and he's not that much better than the previous year. But I had 20 points left over, so might as well make my own, and so like the homework of that is due soon, and I got to get that submitted.
I like that sort of thing. I'll comment after you.
Yeah, and then the third thing is I actually need to learn how to play one of the games I'm going to be participating in.
Oh,
I haven't played Warcry
since
first edition, and I have not touched it since.
And we have talked about the absence of Warcry content, but you're going to participate in Warcry.
So I was looking up some of the things on Warhammer Community, and Warcry has not been featured in an article besides like the model of the year kind of thing since, what was it, September 27th of last year? Mm-hmm. That's almost 6 months ago that Warcry has not been talked about in an article. That's a little crazy to me.
It is.
Mordheim,
but they still are running events.
Mordheim has been talked about more than Warcry has,
which currently doesn't have an active game,
which is wild. So the season of Warcry in the Realm of Beasts has pretty much wrapped up with that last release, and they've done some compendiums and added models from AoS into Warcry and made them available. Gunnar Brand's warband, like the character,
the Darkos
unit
group,
has rules for Warcry, things like that. They've done that sort of thing, but like it hasn't featured in that. AoS in general has not featured an article in about 3 weeks.
Yeah,
since the Gloomspike Gets second wave kind of came out.
Right, wolves.
We really haven't, and that's not new things. That's here's finally they're released after the box came out.
Well, and as you talked about, we've seen what's coming for the next couple things for AoS, but we know a preview event happens at Adepticon, which we will be attending, and we will talk about if you can't attend.
Yep. That is night number 1.
Night number 1, Wednesday.
So we'll if not live, we'll talk about that. Probably a couple episodes if you're tuning in and looking for coverage of that convention. We'll try to get a couple of things out over the course of that weekend.
I know we'll probably talk about the Warhammer event itself as soon as we can, and then we'll have a special guest for one other episode possibly.
And then we'll recap it probably at the end.
Yeah, and really because a new location, it's just going to be a new chapter. But we know Age of Sigmar is on their docket for stuff they're going to show at this new event, at this preview event.
I'm waiting to see when we get our silhouettes, right? Because coming up to this event,
the
preview,
banner,
we should get the banner with what's to come and some hints at what's going to happen, and then which game systems are going to be featured. So I'm waiting for that to confirm what we got, but we have some suspicions that the lack of attention that the fantasy side of the property is receiving is going to be featured heavily in this convention.
And we know it's not because the game is like in a bad spot. We know that by sales it's top 5 among miniatures games. Yep. We know tournament turnout, it's bigger than it's been before. So it could be that there's some massive reveals coming up. And with the change in schedule, they might have had to shuffle that around. So now maybe there won't be a Warhammer preview event in January anymore going forward. So who knows?
Which it did always, when we talked about it, there was always like an end-of-year recap kind of thing. And then it was always like Nova right away and then Adepticon right away. Maybe it will in future years be Adepticon is the kickoff. For the tournament season.
It's like fiscal year and
the
kind
reveal
of thing,
season. Like it might be the first big event, which I love because it's our event.
It is.
Right?
It's our favorite one.
It's in our backyard, essentially. It's in our area, and it's always the most one I'm most excited for. It's the one that I think is the most well-rounded in terms of tournaments versus painting classes versus learning versus community engagement versus vendor halls versus all this stuff.
Well,
it's always the most well-rounded.
It's so unique in that it is exclusively miniatures, and I know they have miniature showcases and stuff in Europe, but here in North America, it's like Adepticon's for when you get nothing but miniatures outside of just a tournament that has some con features.
Right.
This is a convention all about miniatures that also has tournaments.
It's kind of like if you think about like a sporting event, right? It's like, sure, they've got like their vendors inside, but you have someone like roll up outside selling like knockoff T-shirts. Like that's how the vendors at some of the just pure tournaments feel. Right. As you show up with like, hey, I've got Warhammer stuff on a rack outside.
Got cool dice. Yeah.
And it's like, are you supposed to be here? That kind of thing. It's like that you're not here in an official capacity. You show up to hawk product to people who are attending an event. You're not like part of the convention.
Right.
And so it kind of feels a little bit like that. Whereas with Adepticon, it's like there is an entire hall dedicated to just vendors, and it's got a schedule and it's got a map and it's got like.
And
it's real.
Speaking of that, is the last few years, and we talked about this on the podcast as years went by. This is like we're in our third year of this. Is Adepticon had really outgrown the Schaumburg location.
Yeah, we really felt that.
Yeah,
last couple of years.
To where they had to do like a Site B, and there some of the charm of the vendor hall used to be that not only were the big players there, but you had a lot of startups. You had a lot of small time games that would go and hawk their wares kind of and show off. They would hire a really high-end painter to do their displays to bring just to that event to show off their game that nobody knew about. And the last couple of years that was gone.
Yeah, it was kind of like we saw some familiar ones, right?
Yeah.
Your Free Blades, you had your Napoleonic history, fantasy, alternate history game that was always in the back.
Yep.
You always had your Arena Rex and your Kingdom Death and Bushido and those kinds of vendors, which are medium-sized, I would call them.
Yep.
But there was always a handful that were just like, hey, I'm just starting out. I've got 20 models available total, and they're painted amazingly because I hired Wapple.
Right.
Or I hired Angel Heraldez to paint my models for me and get this done for this convention. And we really didn't see much of that last couple of years. It feels like those kind of players have been forced out. Maybe a little bit because of price, maybe a little bit because of the environment of gaming in general, maybe because they needed room for the bigger players.
Well, so they were either forced out, relegated to Site B or whatever, and so it just wasn't like their home anymore. And now I've seen that at the Baird Center in Milwaukee, where this has moved to, which is a bigger venue. We wondered, one of the questions we had is, well, will they expand the vendor opportunities? And now I've seen, at least on Instagram, some small-time shops selling those miniatures you're not familiar with for a game you've never heard of, and they're like, hey, we're going to have a spot at Adepticon. It's like, I am stoked about that.
That's
I love
phenomenal.
looking at that stuff.
And I wonder if because the space isn't as not sought after, that's not the right word, but it's not as high in demand because there is more space. I wonder if they've made it so that maybe to get a spot there it is cheaper.
Maybe.
And so it's more affordable, and smaller vendors are able to actually get in and get a spot that maybe was a high premium because we were running out of space in the previous convention hall. Because I remember Warhammer's booth at Adepticon used to be kind of small for Warhammer being a big player.
It was basically Forge World.
Yeah.
And that was it.
And this last year it was enormous.
They had their own space.
It spanned like the play area plus the vendor hall, and they had to they stayed open after the vendor hall was closed because they expanded out into the, and so it's like, we were out of space. That's just what it was. There wasn't enough room to play and sell stuff because 2/3 of that vendor hall was tables.
Yeah. And so Games Workshop had to make that decision. It's like when you go to a shopping mall and you have that store with doors that are on the outside of the store of the mall versus the ones that are inside, right? The ones that are inside have to close when the mall closes.
Right.
But if you want to keep your own hours, you have one of those doors on the outside.
Your Best Buys and your Targets and stuff that are internal and external.
Yeah.
And
Games Workshop had to do that because it's like, at first they didn't make something like Adepticon a priority, which didn't make sense. Let's just say it. From a business standpoint, that didn't make sense. It's like, this is the biggest miniatures convention in North America, and you were afterthought. You basically showed up with your Forge World booth, and then it was like, wait a minute, we're Games Workshop. We're the miniatures company. And so they've increased their presence the last few years. And this last year, 2024, we really saw that with the fact that their store bled into the tournament hall. So even when the vendor hall closed, their store was still kind of open.
And now I don't know how much selling they were allowed to do when the vendor hall was closed, but at least people could walk through and browse and maybe plot out what they wanted the next day. Because if I was someone working the booth, I know I wouldn't want to get there at vendor hall open and then stay there all night
till 11, 12,
because the vendor hall or because that play hall is open. Like they close at like midnight or something. Like I wouldn't want to sit behind that counter. I mean, I probably would just because while you might not miss out on a sale, you're better off just keeping the register open all the time. You know what I mean?
And you'd be surprised. And we've experienced it with our own local store when we hang out after hours and paint. It's like miniatures, as expensive as they are, there are some impulse buys there. And you get people who walk through a GW store late at night and they just might think like, man, I really like that unit. I really like that small game I've never tried. I just played a demo game of Blood Bowl and I want to buy a team.
My day's over. I got some downtime. I could put this together now.
Or I
do that shit. Like, I do that shit all the time. I go to the vendor hall and was like, I have some downtime this evening. I want to do something with it. Maybe I'll pick something up just to put together
back in your hotel room, or you're sitting out in Fort Wapple or whatever. And it's, which I'm interested to see what that looks like in the new location.
Oh, man, I hope it's glorious.
Yeah.
Because, like, being tucked under the escalators, while it wasn't, like, disrespectful.
It was iconic.
But it was like hidden. It wasn't very big. It was hard to get a spot because it was always occupied, and it just wasn't as large of a space as it could have been. I mean, think about the paint space even at Gen Con. Like the up by the painting cabinets. There was more space up there than this had. It could have been larger, but there was no spot for it to be larger at that convention.
And that was a product of again, like, we had outgrown that facility. And here's the thing. I have wonderful memories of all of the years that we went to the Renaissance Schaumburg.
I miss it already.
It was a great venue, but the convention, and to the credit of the miniatures community, it outgrew that place, unfortunately. And so if we could sing the song Time to Close, that would be what you'd put here.
Time to close?
Right.
Time to close.
Right. It's like you have to say goodbye to the Renaissance Schaumburg, and now we're ushering in a new era, right, at the Baird Center. And so hopefully when we see what this place is like here in less than 2 weeks, we will see it and be like, oh yeah, there's room to grow here, and that's what I'd rather see. I don't want to see, like, obviously Ghost Town, but like,
well, and the funny thing is there's only so many places in the Midwest to have a convention of whatever size, right? The Schaumburg was a good choice for a decade.
It was.
Right? It was. The Schaumburg Renaissance was perfect for years. But now it feels a little cramped, and so we move on to here. And from here, maybe in another decade, we move to another convention.
Well, and they were really, the Schaumburg was really bought time by COVID, because like 2019, we felt it was like,
it was it was scary. We're like, is this going to be here next year?
Right.
Because it was that like sparse.
Yeah. It was so crowded, and the space was gone, and they had to try to cram events and side vendors and stuff into little B spots, and you felt the pressure on the hotel, and like, and then it was like obviously COVID knocked some of the attendance back, but immediately once that reopened up, it was like, okay,
it came back harder. Like, people made up for the slow years.
They did,
and it came back even harder than it left. But like I said, there's only so many spots, and it seems like Adepticon is following sort of a trajectory, a path that even Gen Con did. Because I don't know what year it was before they were in Indianapolis. Gen Con was in the Baird Center at one point, wasn't it?
The Baird Center's, it's either been renovated or it's newer, but Gen Con did a long time ago used to be in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And it eventually moved to Indy. Now, Indy, of course, keeps buying the contract because...
Right.
But they have a...
It's so good for this. I think they invest in it.
And they have a dedicated downtown convention center apart from a hotel. And the Baird Center is that, where it's apart from a hotel. Yeah.
But I wonder how much room for growth does the Baird Center have?
We'll find out.
Because eventually, I can see it, breaking the bounds of the Baird Center and needing a bigger space.
Right.
And what happens when they're looking for a new place and they're like, oh, well, Indianapolis Convention Center is large enough to accommodate that.
Let's have that there.
You know what I mean? Like there's only so many places, that are of various sizes, and you have to find one that's bigger. And then the bigger you get, the less options you have, and it's like...
the cool thing is, like, as far as an event center to house Adepticon, it's like, so it's funny is now we may be biased, but I don't know how often you've been to Des Moines, Iowa, but like
every Christmas.
but they have a couple of event centers downtown, and I went there last year for something. It might be the Hy-Vee Center, maybe that's there. Mm-hmm. But one of them is like, I was walking through, and that's the whole thing I was analyzing. It's like, would Adepticon fit there?
Right.
And it's like, when you look at the halls, it was like, well, it totally could if it was dedicated just for that, and they weren't.
So they rented out the entire thing.
If they rented,
because that's the thing with Gen Con, right? Is there is spots within the Indianapolis Convention Center that is not usable by Gen Con.
Right.
There's more to do. There's more side rooms. There's more, where you have like your demos and stuff.
It's an insanely huge building.
Right.
Like the San Diego Convention Center I've been to is bigger, but like the Indiana Convention Center is
where they need
massive.
where they need to host it is just in the parking garage of Costco. That's it. Because you're talking about a space, that's a space.
Yeah. Well, and in Chicago, so Chicago itself, which is where Adepticon was for so many years, is such a big city that like they have dedicated convention centers they could have looked at, and maybe they did, but they might be really expensive.
Yeah, what's the cost though? That's
right.
That's where,
because you've got like the Donald E. Stevens in Rosemont,
and then what is like the accessibility? That's another big concern, right? Is like not just how much it would cost to rent out the space, but like we need 30,000 people to be able to get here every day.
Yeah, so we need parking, we need hotels nearby, we need food nearby, we need all that stuff. And so it could be they looked at all that and Milwaukee just had the best. And I know these cities put bids on them.
Yeah.
And Milwaukee probably saw an opportunity here.
And I'll tell you what, Milwaukee's pretty sweet.
And that's what I keep, what's funny is as long as I've lived in the Midwest and as much as I've traveled, I've somehow
just never been there.
Never been to Milwaukee.
No. So,
I've been to Madison. I've been to
Madison's great.
I've been to Namakagon. I've been to
Never heard of that. You just made that up right now.
Is it Hayward and Bayfield or Bayward and Hayfield?
Sure.
They're way up by Lake Superior. It's so
Best Lake.
Yeah. Somehow never been to Milwaukee.
Wow. Yeah.
I've had a Milwaukee beer.
So
never been to Milwaukee.
There's a very famous Milwaukee beer called.
It's pretty old, isn't it? Is that Miller?
Milwaukee Ice. Is that what it's called?
It's just called Old Milwaukee.
Old Milwaukee. Is that it? Red Stripe. There you go. Old Milwaukee. Is that it? Okay. There's another one.
It's one of the few not owned by Anheuser-Busch.
Maybe there's another one I was thinking of. I don't remember.
Old Milwaukee.
I don't know where I was going with that. I've had Old Milwaukee though. But we used to go up to. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but years ago, a buddy of mine used to go up to. I was there too. We used to go to Summerfest up in Milwaukee, and it was like 10 weeks of like
music, right?
Weekend themed weekend with like more like how like a medieval festival is.
Like a Ren Fair?
Like a Ren Fair. It's kind of like that, but like for different cultures, right? Because it wasn't just music. It was like all kinds of things for that culture. It was themed around that. So we would go up there for late in the summer for Irish Fest because my buddy loved Irish music and jigs and whatever, that kind of thing. And so we'd go up for Irish Fest for the weekend, and it was a blast. And it was one of the ones that had like a lot to drink. And one of the
Irish head,
one of the bands we saw was actually it was a really funny name. You can look them up. It's called Gaelic Storm. It's hilarious. They were always featured. It was so funny. And when I first heard that, I was like, "That's hilarious." I think that is such a funny thing. But it was always a blast, and we'd go there like almost every year for like a decade, like 10 years in a row. We went. It was a blast. And so, but my experience of Milwaukee was very much around that convention, the fairgrounds of Milwaukee. Yep. Right, because it's a whole massive area. It's almost like a theme park space, but pavilions and stuff that they'd rent out for Summerfest. So that was my limited experience of Milwaukee. And admittedly, I was in high school when we started going, so I didn't get to experience a lot of like, let's go on a beer tour of Milwaukee.
Because you can't when you're only high school age,
right? So I've been told. Yeah. Yes, that's accurate. I haven't just been told that, but that is actually the truth.
Yes, you cannot.
and so, like, I'm excited to go back to Milwaukee because it was a good time when I had experienced it before, and I don't expect it to be any worse.
I mean, it will be March, but who knows?
Who knows?
March in the Midwest is unpredictable.
Exactly. It could be, with how it's always been with Adepticon at Schaumburg. It was always 35 degrees and snowing,
flurry and windy, and
maybe Milwaukee has a different wind pattern that won't be susceptible to that.
Well,
that cold weather.
And being not that far from there, we've had a rather fortunate March where the weather's been okay, and
we only got snow once. So.
We did, and it was a lot, but we got snow, and then we had thunderstorms, and then now cold again. So it could be that it holds out and we get decent weather, but that can be a limiting factor. But I'm excited. I'm excited to experience Milwaukee, and then a new chapter in the Adepticon story.
Yep.
And I hope it's big enough that it can grow there, especially if it goes well.
And I will say that post pandemic, Schaumburg suffered a lot from call it the exodus, right? Of restaurants and culture and whatever. A lot of good restaurants closed. A lot of restaurants we liked changed or got a lot worse.
Yeah.
Or there was new things that we hadn't tried and we were skeptical. Whatever. Milwaukee, I'm hoping after this amount of time is going to give us an opportunity to experience some new stuff and discover things that we like and find new favorites and new hits.
There might even be an advantage to it being a smaller city than Chicago.
Sure.
In that a lot of options are in more reachable distance. Like, because with something like Chicago, it was like you were in a very specific area of Chicago. So to really experience other things, like, well, if we want to take one day away from the convention entirely and drive 3 hours to get through traffic downtown, then we can experience something else. Milwaukee, it's like, well, the event's downtown,
right?
So you're already in the center of everything.
I mean, we even found a hotel that's a half a mile away from the convention center downtown.
That's right.
For pretty reasonable. And I mean, we're within easily within walking distance. I remember one year. This is a side story. We were at Gen Con late summer, hot out. We were given directions to a drugstore by a police officer who was at the convention.
Yep.
Because we were like, hey, we really need something to drink. Not energy drink, but like Gatorade, something, because it's a hot day out. We're getting dehydrated. Right. Where can we find nearby something to go, like somewhere to go drink? And he's like, oh, we'll just go up to this next block, turn left, and just walk straight until you reach the CVS or Walgreens or whatever drugstore it was. And we're like, cool, thank you. We walked for like 45 minutes before we hit that
yes,
drugstore. He sent us to a drugstore 2.5 miles away down this road. It's like, that's... We were already sweating when we embarked on the trip.
Yeah.
Let alone like when we got there. And then we get there and all of their coolers are out of power.
Yep.
And they
had just stocked them, so they were warm.
Oh my God, it ridiculous. That was really fun. We won't have to experience that. Our hotel room is literally half a mile from the convention hall.
We're downtown.
So even if we're like, oh shit, I have diarrhea. I can make it back. I can make it back.
I can clinch and walk funny.
I can make it to the hotel room in time without having to like embarrass myself in the middle of the hall,
right?
Or go to a public restroom. You know what I mean? Like this. I mean, it's such a good spot that it's like clearly there. It's meant for accommodating this kind of crowd.
Yeah.
Because it's completely reasonable and it's so close. I think it's gonna be a great time. It's a great compromise to all the change.
Well, and it's funny is how fast time goes. Is like, I remember when they first announced it was moving, and it was shocking to all of us, but we couldn't picture it as reality because we always imagined Adepticon being where it was. Because even before the Renaissance Schaumburg, right, it was at the Westin Lombard, which was also a suburb of Chicago, and before that it was in a hotel ballroom in Rosemont, and so it was always in that same area. This was a shock, but once we got as we got closer to it, I think that same sentiment I've heard from some of our friends today. When I was in the store, and there was a couple of friends of ours who are going to be in the Warhammer 40k team event, and they were saying the same thing, how excited they are to experience this new version of Adepticon. Because every so many years, it's like, let's enter this new chapter. And so the more I look at it, and your wife, of course, got our hotel, and I looked at where it's located, and it was like knocked out of the park. It's like, I think this is going to be great. Yeah. I know my expectations are high, and so there's a chance, whatever.
Because there's like few opportunities to stay on site.
Yeah.
Right? Like with the Schaumburg, because it was both a hotel and a convention center, there was always a chance you get in on the hotel block.
Which was great.
And you literally stay on site.
Yeah.
You could stay in your pajamas and your slippers and make it back to your room, down to the restaurant, over to the convention center without changing. Right? Yeah. Like that was amazing. Yeah. I loved that. But half a mile is completely reasonable.
It is.
Hang on a second. Did you say 40K team tournament?
Yes.
Isn't that a 4-person event? Is there a different one that's just pairs?
I think theirs is a 2-person, 1,000 points each, unless there's 2 other people participating.
Because that is bullshit. If that's the case, that there was just a 2-person event, I'd look for that shit every single time.
Because we played in a number of those, and they were so much fun.
They are the best events.
The 2-player team events are the best. Why would they go away from
especially when it's like, I don't play this game very much, but I'll play it as a team because I've got a safety net or a partner to make me feel more comfortable. However you want to look at it, right? Like you're not just there on your own to have to remember everything. Because I've wanted to do that for so long. Like every time I I look and see what kind of team events there are. There's never any available for AoS or 40K in terms of just, here's a 2-person team, go play. It's always like, we've got this 4-person team. All 4 of you need to have different armies, no copies of unique characters. You're going to rotate pairings. You're going to draft in the middle so that your pairings for like the matchups are a chess match. It's always like too much. It's like, this is try hard. This is too much. I don't want to have to worry about the different matchups and the different pairings of the Punnett square of all my team matchups. Like, I don't want to deal with all of that. Yeah. Let me sign up with one other person. I don't want to pay $250 to sign up for the event, but let me sign up with one other person just play 3 or 4 games.
Well, and I wonder why.
That's why we did. That's why we went and did that War Machine 2-man tournament, that the teams tournament that we won, that we got 3rd place in that one year. You know what I mean? Like, that's because it was the only event that year that had literal 2-man.
And you know what surprises me about that is like the 2-man team events always filled, and I can't imagine. It's a logistical thing. I can't imagine it's a money thing. Why they switched to the 4-man?
I don't get it.
I actually think you could have both, right? Like,
I think you're getting fewer people signing up, because like even up until sign up ended, a week and a half ago, there were still spots available for those team events. Because I looked again just to be sure, there were still spots for those 4-man pod team events. It didn't fill because it's like. It's such a huge commitment for 4 people to try to coordinate their schedule.
You have to travel with 3 other people, which I'm sure groups do, but you have to accommodate their schedule, what they want to do. They all have to bring armies. Like
and guess what? If one of them has an event at the same time, there goes the team.
Yep.
You know, it's hard to find 4 people, even amongst your friends, who can all be at the same place at the same time to participate in that event. We had trouble signing up for small group events that had 4 to 5 people in it that you would sign up individually because they filled out. You know? Yeah.
Whereas the 2-1 was always a blast. Everybody in the tournament that we encountered, that we played against, had fun.
Every time. Yeah.
And then it's easy to find just one person. And then you each only have to build a half a list essentially, and then just coordinate during the round. And I wish there were more of those. Maybe there were and we missed them, but I think they're in a.
Well, the crazy thing is almost every other major game system had 2-man tournaments. Almost every single one. You had Infinity, all of them except for Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar. Those are the only 2 that didn't. It didn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense.
And those are mostly independent TOs, aren't they?
I think so. For those ones,
because a lot of the side events are run just by like DMs essentially, and it's like, why did they pick 4-man?
4-man pods. It must be the same group that does it for both of them. It must just be that there isn't a group that wants to run 2v2s at this moment in time.
What if we can find out if we can take that?
I'd do it.
Run one.
Fuck it, I'd do it.
I'd do it.
That'd be fun.
Fuck it.
But I want to play.
No, but we only have to run it one day. Give up one day to run it, just one day.
Yeah, but I want to play in it, and it looks really bad if you play and you win in your own tournament.
Yeah,
not to say I would win, but like participating, like because we are sort of affiliated with a game store locally,
right?
The game store owner cannot participate in his own events, or if he does, he chooses to forego any and all prizes and
qualifying spots,
basically trickle down any rewards that you get for participating to the players, or even if you play and you win, you concede and you lose, right? You give up the win to your opponent no matter what, because you are not allowed to win as a tournament organizer or an event organizer or a venue owner. You're not allowed to win those things. Sorry.
No.
So
just bad form.
But so that kind of thing, it's like I'd love to participate, and if it needed a filler person, be a punching bag army or something to play against somebody. But
are you the boxer or the bag?
I mean, you'd be the bag.
Okay.
Yeah, but you'd be like one of those bags that sits on the floor and like pops back up when you punch it. So if you're like unprepared and you hit it too hard, it can spring back up and hit you in the face. That kind of thing.
I was quoting Yellow Ledbetter, but
what's that?
Are you the boxer or the bag? It's the only words in the entire song anyone can understand.
I don't know the reference.
It's Pearl Jam.
Pearl Jam. Oh, that's why, because you can't understand what he's saying.
No.
He growls the whole time.
That song's the worst.
Yeah.
Because like it's funny as you listen to it, it's like, this is beautiful. What the hell is he saying? And then you pull up lyrics.com and you put that alongside the song, and then you were more confused. You're like, that is not what he said
there. That doesn't match at all. Is he speaking a different language?
How
Are
did
you
the word
translating here?
unsealed end up 5 syllables? Like, yeah. And you listen to it, it's like, this is a gorgeous song, but I don't know what. But one of the only parts you hear is he says, "Am I the boxer or the bag?" Anywho, so super excited for Adepticon is what we're getting at. But we think that Age of Sigmar has to be a feature
Has to be
of the preview event
because it's too suspicious
It
that
is.
they just haven't talked about it at all.
It's Games Workshop's second largest game,
Like-
one of their premier products.
Like if you go and look through Warhammer community right now, what do you see? You see Necromunda, you see video game news, you see, oh, this is how you paint up. This is insane. This comes out of nowhere. How to paint Zone Mortalis.
I know that's what I was
from
thinking
a year
about.
and a half ago, like the inside of a building terrain set. Like, when was the last time they've even released that? It was in a starter box for Necromunda like 2 years ago. How to paint Zone Mortalis? Are you kidding me?
And we had a massive slew of 40K releases from the Eldar, and now, of course, Emperor's Children dropped today.
We also had new detachments released for
Oh,
40K.
let's talk about that.
For a handful of armies. The big ones were Custodes,
Tau.
Tau, and Orcs. I think there was one other one that was a pretty big shakeup too. Was it just those three?
We got Index Demons.
Index Demons, that was the other one. It was basically an army of renown for Be'lakor and his army. But these three armies, I don't know if they were needed necessarily. They're always acceptable, right? Because
It's fun to
because new ways to play is always good. However, new ways to play for the sake of it sometimes creates some pretty big problems.
And while we don't like to adopt the gamer moniker of the problem is. Problem. So the Custodes and Tau players that I talked to today, actually, they think their new detachments are fine. The one that looks to be a bit of a problem is this new Orc one.
So I will say that the Tau one is solid. It gives you tactical flexibility.
Yep.
And that's the big thing with that is you get to actually choose with some of your options there, which thing you need at the time and which one you want to flip to, essentially, because it's I know one of the big stratagems, which is the core of the entire detachment, is this threat assessment thing, where you can choose to either have sustained hits for more hits if you don't need to like worry about your wounding, or you can get lethal hits. It's one or the other. You get to choose based on when you activate.
What's interesting is like
huge.
You talked about in 10th edition with this new crit system and keywords that populate off of crits. You wanted to see it utilized more. Well, we kind of got that here, where you get your sustained or your lethals, but the Orc detachment in particular.
Yeah. So the Orc detachment, while there was a pretty solid army already, that was a heavy shooting Orc list. It had lots of I think you forgo the killicans because you want them to be Orc units. No, I think you still had killicans because killicans were still pretty decent at shooting. But you had your Def Dreads and your Big Mechs with your Tank Busters and your Ludas and your Shootas and your Dudas, whatever. all your Udas.
Ooga Boogas.
Your Free Buddhas, whatever. Like there's tons of Udas that you want to bring.
Yep.
But specifically, you had really heavy anti-tank weapons through your tank bust and your big mechs and things like that. They give them additional benefits. This new detachment that they released is even more focused on that shooting aspect. And while it's limited, I call it limited, but it's not really limited. No. You are limited to infantry units and walker units getting the benefits. That's all the units with shooting that you want to bring anyway.
Yep.
Right, so you're not really missing out on much besides your DACA jets don't get sustained too.
Yeah, your truck doesn't get sustained it. Yeah.
Who cares about those ones? You play a very heavy infantry / walker army that on dice with math of with rerolls and attached characters and all this, you get a better than 50% increased hit rate on top of what you've actually rolled, right? So if you've got 10 shots, you generally average about 15 hits
on
a 10-shot dice pool.
Yeah.
That's insane. Nothing in the game besides maybe 6th edition Necron Tesla weapons had that kind of, in Overwatch, had that kind of hit rate.
Yeah.
Right? Like twin-linked Tesla weapons back then, yes, they got the same kind of thing. It was like 100% hit rate on these weapons in Overwatch.
And
which was insane.
Whenever new rules come out, we are among the first who will talk about the overreact. But
part of the problem is with this sort of the setup is like I don't see where you go from here to try to balance it.
Right. And so with the fact that it wasn't just people who hate the army on principle and so they see a new rule for them and automatically assume my army doesn't have this is too good. And then you the overreaction happens, but then people start playing and see there's a way to adjust to it. This was it dropped in day one. People were like,
"This was already a tested army.
Yeah,
this was a high-ranking army already.
The shooting heavy orc army was already tier 1,
right?
And then this thing came out and it's like, well,
this is the same. It's the same list, but now better.
But now you have a chance, depending on your dice, of like essentially tripling the output of the army,
right?
And you had very accredited players participating in like video battle reports, and people were playing like Deathwatch and Custodes and these armies that are some of the toughest nuts to crack, and none of them made it out of the bottom of turn 3 against the orcs.
Yeah,
and
not just orc like fighting. Orc shooting, which is insane. That's an insane. It's an insane thing to say.
Yeah,
it's a wild claim.
And you know, I always like to think, well, maybe there will be an adjustment period where people figure it out and how to play against it. Maybe they won't. But the big thing is this detachment dropped inside of a month of a major tournament. And as far as I can tell, I think it's legal. I could be, someone correct me.
I mean, maybe it's legal in some of the unofficial events. I don't think it's going to be official in. There's a
hopefully it's not illegal at Adepticon, right? At the championships,
it can't be. There's a cutoff date for most of those events
like
where it's like anything
stuff, right?
anything released after X date is not going to be available or viable or allowed at this tournament. Like there's always cutoff dates. This is within 2 weeks of the event. There's no way it's going to be the formal events, but the unofficial sort of team events, I can't speak to because that's up to the tournament, the minor tournament organizers to rule yes or no on.
Yeah, because I heard people speculate, but someone was saying in the team event it is legal, but team events are also more casual,
right?
And you're only bringing 1,000 points apiece. But what about the championships? If that thing's legal and there are orc players who show up with it, like woof,
yeah,
you might have that random 78% win rate for an army all of a sudden. Like now, what do you do?
The only person they're losing to is their own mirror matches.
Yeah,
like because someone has to lose.
And obviously on such short notice, you might not get that many orc players who show up, but the ones who do, just spike it. And then Games Workshop has to decide, like, well, how do you errata this? Because the detachment itself, as you pointed out, is so simple and actually so clean.
Right. There's no like incremental changes you can make to this.
No,
this rule.
you have.
You have sustained hits 1.5. No,
right.
It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, so you either have to decide the stratagems in it are too strong, or you have to decide like, well, the base rule of sustained hits 2 on all infantry and walkers. So one unit gets it, maybe, is what you decide, because they've done that with a detachment before, or they decide this is just legends already and not match play legal.
Right.
Like
change it from sustained hits 2 to like lethal hits.
I mean, the good news is like,
I don't know,
because it's such short notice, you're not going to have people, hopefully, seeing this detachment, buying 2,000 points of orcs on the spot and then getting screwed.
Right.
I think this would end up a minor if they just decided as banned, and people would be like,
you can't change points.
No.
Right? I mean, it would be insane if they set a precedent of like, well, this detachment costs 100 points.
No.
Or something, like I don't see that happening. Like, where do you go? Where do you say that this is how we address this problem?
It's one of the only detachments I've seen. So we talked, maybe it was a month ago, maybe more, about the difference between what drives people to build a certain army in Age of Sigmar versus 40k. And in 40k, sometimes it comes down to literally a single 1CP stratagem decides how someone builds an entire list.
Right. And there are some good ones in this detachment, too.
This detachment, I think all 6 are usable. It's the problem. All 6 are very good and just kind of double down on what the army's doing.
I think maybe half, there's 4 like artifacts.
Enhancements. Yeah.
I think 2 of them are very good.
Very good.
One of them is okay, and the other one's like, that's really kind of questionably useful.
Yeah, but this list makes it so it's just like, this exact roster of walkers and infantry, maybe some of whom are in trucks, we were already playing. We just now take this instead, and it's straight up better than what we were doing. And so the orc players won't be screwed, quote unquote, in the terms of like their army, because they'll still have that.
Yeah, they'll still have a way to play this.
They'll still have an
list.
A-tier list, but this detachment may just end up getting legends immediately. Yeah. Like it's on paper, and in the few games we've observed, some people play tested at the local store today.
It was like, whoa, this is not okay.
And it went the same way that some of the online players observed, where it was like turn one, you had this game where people are trying to like hide and trying to maybe get an objective early, and then turn two, the shooting opens, and it was like, there's not an army in a game that can match the shooting is the problem. Well, maybe the idea is I can move quick and get into combat. It was like, well, there's still orcs.
There's still strength 5 +1 to wound,
multiple
5
attacks.
Because like the turn you get into them, they'll just wog and like outfight you. And
their characters are all still really fighty for cheap.
Yeah.
And so
plus it's like you've got 2,000 points to work with. How much of that 2,000 points you need to be this shooting army?
Yeah.
The other however many points can just be your standard fighty orc army to bodyguard.
Yeah, you can have a single unit of Mega Knobs, or you can have Gazkul by his damn self, and like you can fight most things now. And so I'll put that as a screen to my shooting, and then my looters will pick your best thing and delete it.
Right.
And then my freebooters will pick your other best thing and delete it. And then my tank busters will absolutely delete your next. So that could potentially be one of those like whoops. But the thing is, like, I still am not going to panic in the sense that we're in a very different era of Games Workshop practice, where if it is like that kind of a problem,
we're going to sit on this for 8 or 9 months.
No, it won't make it past one.
Orcs aren't going to be the boogeyman for every tournament for the next year.
No.
They'll be the boogeyman for like
it'll
12
be like, if it shows
days.
up at this event and does its thing, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, it'll be like, okay. They'll be like, well, that was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the remedy in this case is like, well, we need to increase points of orcs. It's like
maybe if they got, because I think they get sustained hits too all the time. Maybe if it was a conditional sustained hits where it's like the turn you wog, you get sustained hits too in your shooting phase.
Right.
Something like that. Because that's usually what the power level is for most armies. Tau was like that.
Yeah.
Tau had mediocre shooting, but for like one turn out of the game, you could
spike,
activate a thing to like get slightly better shooting. Like the fact that orcs just get it all the time is like it's a little unfair.
And for those who don't know, in Warhammer 40k, orcs are not quote good at shooting in terms of how well they hit, because they only hit on a roll of 5 or 6 typically on the dice.
Right.
Some units hit on 4s. You do have some re-rolls and conditional whatevers.
So about Tau shooting. Yeah.
But their strength in shooting was massive bullets.
Right.
You throw 1 billion bullets at the enemy. Well, now the army that already did that well can technically triple their output in a turn. And that created situations where it's not even like you get hot or cold. It was just like, well, on average, I'm getting like 4 to 8 extra shots per unit, and then I'm hitting one better sometimes, or I'm getting re-rolls, and so it's proccing other things off of it. And then now I can have a turn where if you shoot my guys, I get to shoot you back during your shooting phase. And so it's creating situations where these very cheap units, because the orcs are priced based on the fact they're ballistic skill 5+, are shooting way above their weight class in an already A-tier army, because orcs have a load of variety and are already very good. And very good is great. I like when armies are very good. Like, you have a detachment like this now, it's like, this is wandering into some potentially breaking territory.
Very dangerous territory.
Yeah.
A very dangerous precedent to set.
Yeah. And the good news is, well, the bad news, I guess, is that if a bunch of it randomly shows up at Adepticon, if it is legal, you could have a really bad tournament for a lot of people, and that sucks.
Yeah.
If it's not legal at Adepticon, we won't see it, so it won't get corrected.
So maybe it'll survive for another tournament.
For the U.S. Open in like May.
Right.
And all of a sudden there will be a ton of people by then on it. You have 40% of the field show up with orcs, and just,
7 of the top 8 are orcs.
Yeah.
Because the one person that makes top 8 didn't actually have to face against an orc. Like, that's kind of how those go.
Or you only faced one and went 8-1 or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
And so that's So there's like kind of bad thing, but again, we do need to calm down and think this is a different era of GW. They will correct it if it's that big a deal.
Agreed.
So, but that was an observation I got. I didn't see that with the Town Custodies one. I didn't see them being like game breaking.
But they were okay.
I think it was just another way for them to play.
The Custodies one, not that great because it's very I feel like very hero centric.
Okay.
Which is not a great way to have to play. And then the Tau one was just a side grade. It was okay.
Just another way to play.
Yeah. It just.
We had a buddy today, or one of our locals, building some Vespa. Loved it. You know what? Side note. Can we give credit, even though it took a long time, to Games Workshop's effort to bringing some of those older kits up to plastic? Good gravy. Not only did a bunch of Aspect Warriors get up, but it was like, people forget that like Vespids were an ancient kit.
Yeah.
And it's like, now they're plastic and they look great.
All the Kroot stuff.
Yeah.
All the Vespid stuff. Like, I don't think Tau has an old kit anymore. They've done replaced them. I can't think of another one. I mean, maybe a Farseer kit or something for Eldar that's old, but they've kind of replaced almost all of them.
I mean, technically by years, the Falcon is really old, but like
still plastic.
But they recut it in 6th edition, and then they like Wave Serpent Fire Prism they redid, and now all the Aspect Warriors have been updated. So it's like they're doing that now, which is something we thought was long overdue. Is how about instead of inventing new things, you
just update these old ones. People will buy them.
They will buy new plastic, sexy new versions of those old kits. But yeah. And what's your assessment side note? Are Vespids usable right now?
I still think they're solid. I mean, they don't. They obviously don't benefit from a lot of the army rules because they're not Tau Empire models. They don't have the right keywords to benefit from a lot of what makes the Tau work. But they're fast. They're cheap. They hit hard. They're kind of dual purpose unit. They're both fighty. They're decently fighty and they're decently shooty. I think they're fine.
We had a friend of ours from China who thought that
oh my god, it was so funny.
If you reduce their points cost by 2 per model and eliminate their guns.
Their gun, that was really good, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is a 2-shot, strength 5. It was basically a heavy bolter.
Yeah.
It was a 2-shot, strength 5, -1/2 gun at 18-inch range or something. It's super
on a
good,
unit that deep strikes and flies.
Super good profile. It moves 14 or whatever. Super good profile. Hits on 4s. And just removed their gun. He got rid of that gun, but lowered them from 12 to 10 points each. They'd be a better unit. Just because all he wanted them to do was just go grab objectives.
We love you, Bob, by the way.
Jeez, that is such an insane assessment. I'd pay an extra 2 points per model if it can also shoot on the turns that it isn't able to go capture an objective. At that range, with that kind of a threat range, a 34-inch threat range or whatever it was, like that's insane. That's really good.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people will hold objectives. So it's like you have two kinds of things that hold objectives. It's either a complete Death Star that you're not going to kill, or a 5-man unit of guys wearing T-shirts.
Unit. Tiny hideable unit that can't be seen because they're in a building.
And Vespid guns were perfect for killing that. Yeah. And so, like, I don't know. And their new models look really good.
Yep.
I was looking at them in person today, and
they even got special weapons in the unit now, and grenade launchers and whatever. Like, it's cool. I like them. Yeah. They're exactly what they should be.
And they look in person like, I mean, they are gray wasps. They look like wasps.
Yeah, and they're like so spindly. Like they're exactly as skinny and like fiddly as you'd expect them to be.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they're great. I love all the Tau auxiliaries though. I wish they would expand that a little bit more.
They might
give us a few more.
They may, Mr. Frodo. They may. I was at a restaurant once in Baltimore, and they had wasps. They had crickets, wasps, grasshoppers.
Did you try them?
I didn't. They just had them on display.
I couldn't do it.
I wouldn't either. Yeah. I don't need to eat that. I have real meat. I don't eat.
Speaking of though, I could go for some
wasps.
Meat.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's do that.
Thanks for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Follow us for more of our weekly episodes on YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and Podbean. You can follow myself and Llama on Instagram. We are at Llama Paints Minis and Hyena Paints Minis. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. And as always, we'll catch you next time.